He'll be watching. So if I call on him to come back on, he can do it, but he won't be with us. And then in one minute, I'll reintroduce you all over again.
Okay.
All right. So we're live now. Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and we're going to France today, to the south of France, to see an old friend whom I've never met in person before. We've had a long-standing good relationship. His name is René Wadlow, and he has contributed enormously to Peace Magazine over the years. He's a wonderful writer, and he used to be living in France, right very near the border of Geneva. So he was watching everything going on in Geneva and observing and writing articles for us. And now I get to talk with him in person. Hello, René Wadlow.
Hello, Meta. It's great to be in touch.
It's wonderful to be face to face with you, although through some machinery that is a little unfamiliar to us, and we had to struggle with it. But let's see if we can keep this thing going long enough to actually do a long conversation, a 1-hour conversation. Okay?
Great.
Terrific. Okay, I want to tell the world a little bit more about you because you are a man of very great importance in the world of peace workers. And I've been extremely grateful to you over the years for all of the wonderful little short, usually about 1 page long for the magazine, articles about what's going on in the world, either the conflicts that are happening in various parts of the world, or some anniversary of an event that we should all keep in our memories and so on. So you've written these marvelous little pieces for us, which we can't use them all, but they're marvelous. And thank you for that. And thank you for your work as for the World Citizenship Movement. And you are the main person. I don't know what your title is in this World Citizenship Movement, but let's start off by talking about that, because I think that is maybe your main identity socially in the world, that you've taken the leadership of that organization or that movement for a very long time. And please tell us all about it. What is it to be a world citizen, and how did the whole thing get started?
Good. Thank you, Meta. I was privileged to be able to talk with you and to, through you, to talk to many others who are interested in peace and justice. There have always been people who thought of themselves as cosmopolitans, who were concerned with the world as a whole and not simply the city-state in which they were living. And there are echoes in ancient Greece and among the Stoics of Rome. But as a political movement in modern times, basically it began in the late 1930s when people both in the United Kingdom and in the US became increasingly concerned with the clouds of war that were gathering in Europe, and the narrow nationalism which was reflected in the thinking of the Nazis in Germany, the fascists in Italy, the fascists in Franco's Spain, and who felt that there should be some sort of alternative to this type of thinking. And so a group of people in London who had often been related to the League of Nations efforts began a World Citizens Association, and at the same time around the University of Chicago in the States, there were people who like Quincy Wright, who was a well-known international lawyer, professor at the University of Chicago, felt that the situation was extremely critical and that something should be done. And so in the two cities, a group of people joined together, in a sense, with this idea that one had to, one, combat narrow nationalism, and two, be concerned with the wide range of problems that were being faced. That is, that there wasn't just a crisis of Poland or a crisis of Ethiopia. There was a worldwide problem. And this continued during the war period, especially in the UK, where there were a good number of people who were in exile from Poland, from Norway, from a little bit all over, who went to England. And many of these people were involved in what became the creation of UNESCO, Julian Huxley in particular. And as you know, the constitution of UNESCO begins with wars begin in the minds of men, and therefore it is in the minds of men that peace must be created. And this has remained, I think, the core thought, with, at the same time, for some individuals, a basically spiritual, if that's the term one wants to use, a spiritual element of the unity of humanity, that we are all part of a common core, and therefore we must in some way be concerned with each other, and as a result we must be concerned with human rights. We must be concerned with the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And so that these two elements, the one an emphasis on, in a sense, the more political aspect, but always with a resolution of conflict theme, and a more spiritual one. We are all part of a common humanity, and therefore we must work to overcome poverty, overcome all the things that limit or diminish humanity. And so these two have been our emphasis, but in a sense, because of the League of Nations background of some of the people, the world citizens became involved very early in the work of the United Nations, and has a consultative status with ECOSOC, but which allows one to deal basically with all the various programs and aspects of the UN. So that
now, excuse me, but you mentioned UNESCO.
yes.
Is that the particular connection, or how I was not aware of the connection between the World Citizens Movement and UNESCO? What is that like?
Well, in the very beginning, the organization in the UK that was, in a sense, the founding group of UNESCO was called the Association for World Citizen Education.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
So very quickly, UNESCO created in 47, 48 a program around the terminology world citizen education for world citizenship.
Mhm.
But this offended some of the more narrow-minded people in the US who saw world citizenship in some ways as a front for the communists, and they were afraid that communists were infiltrating, et cetera, et cetera. This was actually before the McCarthy period, but the McCarthy period is a good indication of where that attitude went. And so UNESCO dropped education for world citizenship as a theme. And only in more recent years has created an important section called Education for Global Citizenship. So the term global citizenship rather than world citizenship.
It's a funny thing that kind of terminology should make a difference, but it's a kind of encouraging if they are even talking that way. I had a talk show a month or so ago with a friend who said globalization is dead. And I thought I was a little shocked at the strength and the flatness of his pronouncement. That I've been certainly aware that nationalism is on the upsurge globally, but the idea that feeling oneself to be identified with the whole of humanity is a dead notion was a pretty shocking idea. So what you're saying is that it's not all dead everywhere, because if UNESCO is reviving that kind of education for global identity, that's a very good sign. Is that really a significant movement, or is it just something I would like to hope for?
I think that linked to the UNESCO efforts, and we're involved with them, there is a strong education for peace, more and more at the actually primary and secondary school level. There has always been, since the mid 1950s, peace studies at the university level, and various universities, as you know, have had peace study programs. But there's a strong feeling that you have to start at a younger age to develop the attitudes of people toward dialogue, compromise, etc. And so the UNESCO program is aimed largely at secondary school education, and they have developed extremely good teacher material for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
At this level. I participated. One of the things that, as you know, the UN has normally each year a conference for non-governmental organizations in consultative status, and several years ago, which was the last year that Ban Ki-moon was Secretary General, the meeting was held in Korea, in which he participated, and I was also there, and the theme was education for global citizenship, and there were great contributions, very useful contributions from people all around the world on this theme, and who were developing it at the educational level. So I think that the there's a lot of work. I think that, and which may have been the concern of your person with whom you were talking. The term globalism is seen negatively by some people as a top-down form of imposing regulations on governments, on people, etc. And there's a fairly strong, in Europe in particular, a fairly strong anti-globalism movement.
Well, excuse me, but I think this fellow that I was speaking with shared that, but mostly because his notion of what globalization is was not my assumption. That I'm thinking in terms of sort of empathizing with people in other tribes, if you will, or other nations, as you will. But he was thinking much more of it as corporate dominance. You know, the world of corporations as being in charge of the world economy, and that economic dominance is, I don't think it necessarily goes at all with the globalization in the sense that you and I are talking about, thinking of ourselves as world citizens.
I agree fully. That is, it's unfortunate, but it happens with other terminology. A term becomes associated with a relatively narrow number of concepts, and so people react against, and we see it with the discussions of feminism, the discussions of gender, of race, etc. Terminology is often used originally. A broad term is then made more narrow, and people are opposed to it because the narrow concept is not what they mean. And so this is where I think we all have to remain sensitive to the way in which words are used. And if a terminology, regrettably takes on another coloration than what it is that we mean, we drop it and are willing to use another term. So that for me, for a certain number of people, world citizenship does represent this idea of concern for all of humanity and for going beyond the limits that governments set with their borders and their border walls. But if the term disturbs some people, I don't think that we're linked to a term. We're linked to a concept. I think this
okay,
is
but I think that we have to also acknowledge that that we're talking about a real difference of attitudes, that there is a contrast. In other words, the notion of we are all one humanity and we must identify strongly with all of us and not just, that means not so much with our own particular tribe or nation. And there is, there are periods of time when I think the national identity has become too important. And you were talking about the late 1930s as a time when nationalism was so pervasive and so dominant in our thinking that it needed to be offset with a different kind of emphasis. And we're in that period right now again, the rise of nationalistic, populist movements globally. It looks to me like very much the problem that set off people talking about how to create a more global identity.
Yeah, I certainly agree. It's certain that, and we see it in particular in the former communist states, that is that the sort of national sentiment in Poland, in Hungary, in Armenia, etc., was strongly downplayed in the Soviet Union period, in terms of a broad internationalism, which was to bind all the workers of the world together, etc. And as a result, when the Soviet Union broke up, we see both within the countries that were part of the Soviet Union, such as Armenia, such as Georgia, such as Nagorno-Karabakh, etc. And in those countries that were under Soviet influence, let's say, such as Poland, Hungary, etc. Suddenly, nationalism has come to the fore because it had been, as it were, crushed, and suddenly everything that is held back for too long a period and is unable to express itself comes to the surface and is often then in its most virulent and negative way. And so
okay, now I remember, because I was active in the Helsinki Citizens Assembly at the time that the Cold War ended, or rather the Soviet Union broke up. And we, I remember our first meeting as a public event in Prague, and being really surprised and troubled by the fact that the people coming had big banners for their nation. They were already wanting a separate identity for Poland or Estonia, or what. All of these countries were really nationalistic movements already. And you're right, you're pointing out a thing that took place at that moment. But the same thing has become much more prevalent now in other places that were not the Soviet Union. We're talking about Modi in India. We're talking about Bolsonaro in Brazil. We're talking about Trump in the US. These were not the remnants of the Soviet Union. It's a different kind of thing. And I spend half of my time thinking about the explanation for it. I don't see any moment, I don't see any reason historically, anything going on in the world today that would call forth such a tribalism, a kind of narrowness of identity that we see in identity politics. Let's talk even about the wokeism, if you will, in the US, this critical race theory, which identifies people by their ethnicity as some sort of a mutable prominent part of their identity. It's assumed that it's inevitable, you can't help it, that you have to acknowledge it. And that kind of almost legitimating the primacy of tribalism of any kind, whether it's ethnic, religious, or national, or even gender. This kind of focus on the importance of that kind of special identity as opposed to universal identity is I think the most troubling thing in the world right now today. And I don't know what to do about it. And I talk about it all the time. Unfortunately, every time I get a talk show, I veer off into talking about that because it's on my mind so much. In a way, I should ask your advice as the head of world citizenship, sir. What are we going to do to fix this problem?
Right. No, I think that we certainly agree on the dangers that face, and here in Europe in particular, the attitude of various countries and of various groups within countries toward migrants leaving Syria, leaving Afghanistan, going to Greece, going to Turkey, trying to get into Western Europe, being pushed back by border guards, etc., is extremely worrying, and is a denial of all the values that we share and that people working for human rights share. And fortunately, especially coming from the churches, there has been a pushback, and so that the German Protestant churches in particular have cooperated to create several boats that pick up people drifting in the Mediterranean on small, rafts and this sort of thing, and who are often pushed back by the official Coast Guard.
Yes, that's the thing that horrifies me. It can be, it's kind of illegal to go around and pick people up and try to save their lives. I mean, it's treated as if you're doing something criminal if you do that. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm reporting things that have been said to me by people who are not alarmists, and I think it's a ghastly thing. Am I exaggerating?
No, I think that there have been, fortunately, there are people who, human rights defenders, etc., who have reacted positively, but there were various people on the Alps, which separate Italy from France, who helped refugees from Italy to get into France and hopefully perhaps to other European countries. And they were arrested as though they were smugglers, etc. And there were trials, and Amnesty International and other human rights organizations participated to help in the help the defendants in the trials. So, and we see currently in France there is the in a sense first aspects of what will be a presidential election coming up next year, 2022. But people are already, feeling the grounds, etc. And anti-migration, and behind it, anti-minorities is one of the strong themes of what we'll call the right.
Is that, you're talking about Marine Le Pen or somebody else now?
She is obviously the most photogenic of the people who are pushing that, and her political party is certainly in the lead. But unfortunately, it's not limited to Marine Le Pen. It's more and more people, because this Sunday in France there are elections at, in a sense, what are called departments. There are 50 some departments in France administratively, and 13 regions. And so there are elections for deputies at the regional parliaments and at the departmental parliaments this Sunday, and then the following Sunday, the leading candidates fight it out. But again, this sort of narrow anti-foreign propaganda is strong.
But would you say that that they may win, that the right may actually be in running the show after these elections?
You know, one hopes not. Obviously, they do not represent my biases, but looking at it simply as a political scientist, they are likely to gain seats. Whether they in fact get a majority in the regional and departmental parliaments is unknown, but all the polls that have been made in advance of the election show a higher rate than 4 years ago, which was the last elections. So that these movements are growing, and people who were not particularly on that wavelength now are using those arguments, because it seems to be, themes that people are concerned about. So that it is worrisome, and one finds for the world citizens, we often contact government ministries at the UN around human rights themes, because since we are active at the Commission, we're now called Council of Human Rights, UN Council of Human Rights, governments, the ministries and especially the ambassadors have heard the name, etc., so that we don't come out of nowheres to contact them. So very recently, a couple of weeks ago, the socialist government of Denmark, which is if you like, a center-left government, wanted to send back to Syria many of the people who had refugee rights or in Denmark, saying the situation has gotten better in the Damas city and area. And so we wrote to them and said, yes, it is true, there is less violent fighting in Damas and the area around it. Nevertheless, people who have been in exile in other countries are suspected of being in opposition. The Syrian government has a history, unfortunately, of oppression of people thought of as opposition,
Mhm.
with torture, even death, etc. So we received a long reply from the Danish ministry, explaining that no one would be forced to go back.
Oh,
They
all
are
right.
uh,
Mhm.
they're encouraged, you know.
Mhm.
But this is one of the uh, roles, I think, of non-governmental organizations. That is that
Mhm.
one tries to be as close to the reality of the ground, if you like, as possible. And when people are arrested, persecuted, et cetera, one reacts, um, and I think uh, governments are not um, of only a single mind. There are people within governments and ministries who are more hardline, and those who are more open to dialogue,
Now,
etc.
within France, or the French government now, would you say there has been a trend over the last 4 years or so? What has Macron been seen as uh, proposing and advocating, and how much support has he won or lost in public opinion?
Yeah. Personally, um, I tend to support many of the measures, especially in foreign policy, um, that he has proposed. However, as an individual, he comes across as arrogant. From the very beginning, he was, in a sense, code name as Jupiter, as
Really?
in a sense the God who sees and does, etc. And very quickly, what became a very strong movement in France. Every automobile has to have um, it's like a life jacket um,
Yeah,
in the
yellow jacket thing, yes.
yellow jacket. So the yellow jacket is to be able to be seen by others if your car breaks down and you're repairing, etc. And so you put on a yellow jacket, and the coming cars see you. So it became a symbol of we who are not seen by the government, as it were, put on a yellow jacket. And so
I knew of that when there was this movement of people protesting against some sort of gasoline tax or something, wasn't it?
so it
But
began.
has it continued? Has it become a movement for other issues now, or is it?
Yeah,
I only heard of it with respect to this
uh,
movement a year or
well,
so ago, where there were people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it began virtually shortly after Macron was elected, um, because one of the issues, correctly, I think, is to discourage individual car use and put an emphasis on uh, collective transport by train, etc. So the idea was to have a tax on gasoline, um, that would be paid by the individual car owner. And it was also linked to the idea of taxing trucks from foreign countries that were crossing France with goods, with the idea that they could send it by train rather than having individual trucks which use more gasoline and pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So the two themes around greater taxation of cars or trucks came up at the same time, and especially the people who didn't want to pay individual car taxes, higher taxes, began this emphasis. So as a result, it became a very strong movement, and to counter it, Macron developed something which had never been done before, which was to choose by lot 150 people throughout the country, chosen by lot to during 5 or 6 months. They would meet and discuss sorts of reforms. They came up with something like 120 propositions of reforms that should be undertaken.
Is this what did they call it, a citizens' assembly?
Yes, so this was the idea of.
Yes, I love that idea, and I really think it could be a really important thing. I was not aware of the one that Macron put together. So did it work? I mean, do you feel that it was a success in functioning and giving good advice to the government?
Well, I think that many of the suggestions were good. That is that the ability of people to articulate grievances, etc., in a sense, goes within France, goes back to the French Revolution, where just before the revolution, people wrote out what they considered to be abuses and presented it to what was an embryo parliament under the king. So there is that tradition in France, which could be and was mentioned as not something that was suddenly created, but that had roots way back. Unfortunately, there were only something like 20 of the propositions that the government was willing to accept. So there was if you like, a counter reaction saying, but the other 100, propositions were swept under the rug. So a lot of propositions were probably impractical. I've read through some of them. So it's always a question as to how governments react. Plus, you had people in the two houses of parliament, there's a Senate and a lower house, who said propositions are our job. It's not a job of citizens chosen by chance, etc. So that some people in parliament who would probably have supported the propositions had they made them, didn't support them because they had been made outside of the parliament. So it is a difficult way of how does one get echoes, but many of us have worked for some sort of people's chamber within the UN system, or within national governments. I think it's an idea that is being thought of more and more. To what extent it will be created, I don't know. But I think that there is not necessarily a good thing. There's a sense that parliaments don't really reflect the people. That the parliaments are made up of people who are already something in their community, who rub each other's back, sort of thing. And so
but also, in many countries at least, there's, the campaign finance thing is always such a corrupting influence that,
right,
you might as well say that your politicians are bought and paid for, So quite apart from all the other concerns about how representative they are and so on.
yes.
Yeah, sure. It's a big issue. But I'm not sufficiently aware of the fact that there is a move to try to use that. And you're talking about it, I've always talked a lot about the idea of having a parliamentary assembly in the UN, a
Yes.
third house of the UN besides the Security Council and the General Assembly. There should be something like a parliamentary assembly. And I had assumed that if that happens, it would not be by having people draw a lottery of members of all societies, but rather have the politicians who are elected from each of the societies be chosen as at least the first people to be delegates to that assembly. But what you're suggesting is maybe we should right off the bat maybe have a drawing of people by lottery or something. Be really representative.
Yeah, it's hard to know what, as I say, there is a sentiment of resentment and a sense of not being heard,
Mm.
and how one counters this by institutionalizing, I think is a real question. You spoke earlier your interest in the Helsinki assembly movement, etc. There has been created within the Helsinki states a parliamentary assembly with members elected to the national parliament. But what they do, although they have a website, what they do is totally unknown to 99% of the people who are citizens of the Helsinki, accords.
Well, it's certainly totally unknown to me because you're telling me something I have not heard before. And I did an interview about 2 weeks ago with Fred Tanner and another woman whose name I can't recall, who both were engaged with with work in the OSCE.
Mhm.
And I would have thought that, if there was a parliamentary parliament being elected by people in the Helsinki, I don't know what you mean by the Helsinki states, but that it would have come up there. They didn't mention any such thing. Tell me about it. What is this thing?
Yes, that's because I had a colleague in Sweden who was very enthusiastic about the Helsinki Parliamentary Assembly, and said, you know, this is the wave of the future, etc. Look at it and write about it, etc. So I did follow, some of their, or read some of their reports, which were, totally legitimate and valid, but understood by few people and totally unknown to the great bulk of people. And even I have ceased following the reports because it struck me as going nowheres. But that may be a harsh judgment. I'm not saying that my disinterest is a correct reaction to their things, but I think even the European Parliament, which is elected by direct vote, their discussions are virtually never on the evening news or on the noontime news. You really have to be interested in knowing, and so a few people in the European Parliament are media people. That is, they know how to use the media, and their views are reported, but not what they say in the parliament. It's basically what they say about the man who may be the candidate for the Ecology Party in France in the presidential elections of 2022, is a member of the Ecology Party in the European Parliament. So he is known by the media and quoted, etc. But it's not linked to his work in the Parliament. And so
yeah, but now that seems to, if I can interrupt, because it strikes me that this is really relevant to what I've heard about the motivation of people who wanted Brexit. That the objection was, we used to know our MPs, but we don't know these guys who are representing us in the EU. That these are alien faces. They're not accountable to us. They're not publicly, out there in holding public meetings or anything like that. So who are these guys, and why should we be part of something that is that they're not really representing us? If that's true, and I was told that that's kind of the attitude that was the fuel for Brexit. And now I don't know how widely that's felt in other countries, but it sounds like a real problem.
Yes, I agree. That is that how one counters that. All of the people in the European Parliament have a communications person on their staff. And in fact, Marine Le Pen, that we were talking of earlier, who represents the far-right movement in the French politics, is a member of the European Parliament, and as such has paid by the European Parliament 7 or 8, I forget the exact number. Each parliamentarian has assistants who are paid by the European Parliament itself, and nearly all of them are nearly one of the group, and perhaps more, are communications specialists. So Marine Le Pen began a court case because she used her parliamentary assistants, who should have been in Brussels and in Strasbourg, for political jobs within France itself, and unrelated to the European Parliament, even though they were paid by the European Parliament. So then this was raised, and she has to pay back to the Parliament. But it's certain that as I say, I get the French daily newspaper, which is called Le Monde, the World, and would be roughly equivalent to the New York Times. It's the magazine, the journal, the newspaper read by, if you like, the intellectual milieu, etc. And virtually never is there an article about the work of the European Parliament, except concerning agricultural subsidies, because France is the largest beneficiary of European Union agricultural subsidies, and so that issue does get looked at. However, I cannot think of another issue which is followed constantly. Every so often, there was recently the visit to the European Parliament of Viktor Orban, the Hungarian minister, because there were arguments within the parliament that the national policies were going against the human rights standards of the parliament, and so he came to defend, etc. So that was, reported in the press, but only because he was the president of a country, and the money might have been taken away from the country, etc. So that it's very difficult for people who are not, news hounds and go looking at Google, etc., to find out what's going on in the European Parliament, to understand what's going on and how this is overcome. But as you said, this was really one of the Brexit themes, and a resentment of, like the Gilets jaunes, of not being heard by the authorities.
Well, I think we have a real problem there, and I don't know the solution to it. For one thing, there's, at least in I want to say North America, but I don't know. I don't know where all, but there's been a decrease in plain civics education of high school students and so on. I don't know whether that's true in France, but kids are not taught how government works and how to make it more effective. And I think that's something to be overcome. But how far will it go if you did give people more education about their rights and what the law says about voting and so on? Would it overcome these populist trends? I think there's some kind of zeitgeist about identifying with a subset of humanity, and it could be a group, local tribe, could be an ethnic community, a nation, gender, religion, I don't know. But this, the particularism of the day is an attitude that I find just very troubling, and it takes, you can see the manifestation. And when we say that people can't identify who their MP is, or people certainly can't identify who their EU delegate is,
Right.
and what to do about that, I don't know. Maybe citizens assembly, where people are actually drawn upon by lottery, and people actually reach out and pick the local, the grandmother next door, and say, you're the person to be in this committee, and then have them meet for a long period of time with the resources that they can call upon informants. I think really we need to be able to have people know that expertise is available to them, and that the experts are not just an alien elite that's there to dominate them, but a resource that should be, their knowledge should be called upon more. And because I think actually some of the bureaucrats are probably better, more competent. If we talk about the ministries of this or that, agriculture or education or health or whatever, there are competent people in those organizations, these agencies, that people who know things that the average politician doesn't know.
Right. Yes.
And yet they don't have the authority to make decisions. It's the politicians who make the decisions, and the politicians don't know the damn thing about, cyber risks, or, what needs to be done to stop hackers or these things. So drawing together the knowledge that we need and the popular support that is required to get decisions made with authority, with backing, with public support. There's a gap there that I don't know how to fill, and I think it's a problem.
Right. This is where I think that we were talking about civics education. One of the things that should be taught and known is where people can turn for relatively objective information, because there is, in Europe as in the States, etc., there are a lot of information circulates on YouTube or other media forms, which is, in quotes, fake news. That is, that it is not simply that it's a person's opinion, but it is deliberately created in order to lead people astray. So I think this where does one go for information is an important aspect of civics education.
Yes, but the average person doesn't have control over where you get the information
Right.
because that's decided for you by the guys running this social media outfits. And here we can veer off into a matter of great passion for me. You and I are making a show talking about a serious global matter. When we're through, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to try to put it, I will put it up on YouTube. It is on YouTube. I will put it up on Facebook. I will put it up on Twitter. And then I will apply to have Facebook publicize this thing. That is, well, it used to be that I still do to some extent, pay something like $30 a week, and they will send this out to between 30,000 and 90,000 computers all on Facebook. And people will probably not look at it because they don't want to spend an hour listening to you and me. But their option is there, and they see it, and it sort of makes a difference. I think it's not very expensive. $30 a week, you get a lot of coverage. It's worth doing. Okay, I was doing that for a year or two, and then suddenly Facebook ran into this problem with the Cambridge Analytics scandal, and the Russian hackers scandal, and the people in St. Petersburg who were, pretending to be Facebook people, who've made up names of people in the US they pretended to be, and they were, trying to incite conflict in the US public opinion and so on. So Facebook becomes defensive, and they start making, they don't want to have the business of deciding who is legitimate and who is fake. So they basically say nobody can publicize anything. If you want to boost things, you want to pay to have something publicized, and you want to talk about any serious global issue, no, nothing doing. You can't do that. You can pay us to publicize the pictures of your cat, or your summer vacation, or your what you ate for breakfast. But you and I, Renee, will probably not be able to post this, and no, they can post it, but we'll probably not be able to disseminate it on Facebook because we're talking about serious global issues, and that's not acceptable. So in order to combat what you call fake news, they're stamping out people who want to publicize anything serious.
Right, yes. Now that's very dangerous.
It's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, I can't publicize maybe half of the shows that I want to. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's a real infringement on exactly what I consider my legacy, if you will, what I'm trying to leave behind me as I'm going to be 90 years old very shortly. I want to be able to say I've done something worthwhile. I've held these conversations with these sensible people about serious issues, and I put them in places where people can watch them. That's my way of contributing to the world. It's the most important thing I know to do, but I'm not allowed to do it now.
No, I think your motivation, honors you and is certainly fundamental. And the fact that it is limited, where the photos of cats or breakfast food is not, I think is in some ways intolerable, but as you say, has become a pattern, and it is dangerous. And I think this is where one has to recognize the dangers and also find avenues to get around some of the dangers, but that's easier said than done.
I've been working on it and I haven't succeeded yet. But our time is up. In fact, we're overdue. But I'm
Well,
just so delighted that we're able to finally have a real conversation. And it's been wonderful. So I'm gonna.
well, thank you, and I hope that as things go on, there may be other occasions where we can discuss some of the issues that are facing humanity. And as I was saying, the spirit of Geneva was alive these days with the meeting of the president of the US and Russia. So again, thank you so much
Thank
for.
you so much, Renee. It's been lovely. And carry on. You're one of the great people of the world.